uh, who is the president of the ICCR, for this roundtable that we are having today on Hindutva and secularism. We are also waiting for Advocate Shri Sai Deepak, who will be joining us shortly. As you know, some of you would have attended this, and we had a wonderful Vimarsh public lecture by Professor Arvind Sharma on Hindutva, and that was in sometimes in May, I think 16th May, and that has kicked off a series of discussions we plan to hold on the broader theme of Hindutva and what it means and what are its various dimensions and how it impacts our understanding of what is going on in India, how it impacts the politics, and we are also taking up some specific issues like Hindutva and secularism, which is the theme for today. The idea behind these discussions is really to have a proper, deeper understanding of this term Hindutva, which is being spoken so often, but I think which is not well understood, and it also causes a whole lot of confusion. So nobody is better placed than Professor Arvind Sharma, who is a professor of comparative religion at Mcgill University. He's been teaching there for more than 35 years and has written a number of books on religions, comparative religions, and also on Hinduism, etc. So Professor Gurumurthy ji, when I think Arvind Sharma ji, when contacted him or they were in touch, he suggested that we should have these discussions. And so this is the result. And we plan to have 5 such discussions. One we have already held. Today is the second one. And then we'll have some more. And it will end with a public lecture once again by Professor Arvind Sharma. And all these lectures we hope to put together as a publication of the VIF. So this is the plan. So thank you very much, sir, for being with us and helping us understand. The last lecture itself was really a fantastic lecture that and very illuminating for most of us. And for me personally, I think it threw a lot of light on what Hinduism is and what Hindutva means. And I think we need to explore these concepts a little bit more as we go along. And I also want to thank Vinay Sahasrabuddhe ji, who himself has written a lot on this subject. And as president of the ICCR and as someone who is in charge of public diplomacy in a way in the Ministry of External Affairs and their efforts. And I think explaining these terms at a deeper level is very important. And I think his own publications on culture are very important. And many of you would have read his articles. He's frequently commenting on some of these issues. So I think we could have had a better person to take up some of the ideas which Professor Ravi Sharma will today discuss. And of course, we have Sai Deepak, who is a young advocate, but now has written several, though an engineer, but he has now, he's a very sharp legal mind. And also he's written a number of books and his trilogy on Hinduism, which came up last year, and another trilogy that he has written this year. This also has led to a lot of debate and very, I think, good level debate in the public about these various concepts. And I think broader than Hindutva, not just Hindutva, but much broader as to thinking about ourselves. So these lectures and these discussions are really a way of rediscovering ourselves, and something which we had not done earlier, and we had been swayed in one direction. So there's that correction that is required. But all this is being done in a fairly intellectual manner, and not in a propagandistic manner, I should say. And I think Professor Arvind Sharma's writings on just not on Hinduism, but in comparative religions are really an eye-opener for all of us. And I would suggest a lot of these youngsters who are here, they should read some of his writings. So without taking more time, I think Shishi Prabhaji has also joined us from Singapore, where she is sojourning. Thank you very much. And
Namaste, sabko namaste.
She's also well known and associated with the VIF today, and herself an exponent of ancient Indian philosophy, has written many books on that. So thank you very much for joining us. And Professor Ashok Vora also welcome you. So Professor Mishra.
Thank you, sir. Namaste. So friends, can you hear me? Yeah, good. So what I propose to do today, I would do in 3 parts. First, there are some introductory remarks, and then an exploration of the evolution of the idea of secularism in the West, especially with a view to examine how well it could be applied to the Indian case. And then finally, a proposal or a suggestion of a concept within our own tradition, which might serve us better than secularism. Okay, so liberal public discourse in India posits a distinction between a secular democratic India, as envisaged in the Indian Constitution, and the concept of a Hindu nation associated with Hindutva. This point has been presented with great clarity by Member of Parliament Shashi Tharoor in his numerous writings and interviews. He contrasts 2 concepts of citizenship, which we may label as territorial and ideological. According to the territorial concept of citizenship, all the people residing within a defined territory are full-fledged citizens of the nation, irrespective of race, religion, caste, gender, or any such consideration. This territorial concept of religion is then contrasted with the kind of citizenship which would prevail if India were to be considered a Hindu nation. This would mean that the Hindus constitute, in some sense, undetermined sense, the more authentic citizens of the nation. The point can be refined. It can be argued that perhaps non-Hindus could also be citizens of the nation, but Hindus would have, in some sense, the first claim to the citizenship of the country, either by virtue of their history or the fact that they regard this territory as their sacred land. In a way, followers of other religions do not. The word Hindu here, of course, is a synecdoche for the followers of all religions which originate in India, namely Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. It is significant, however, that the Indian Constitution, drawn up by the Hindu Mahasabha around the time of India's independence, accepted all people in India as full citizens of India. Even though the Mahasabha could be considered one of the main organs of the Hindutva movement. This primus inter pares, first among equals, status of the Hindus serves to soften the hard line often associated with Hindutva. Such a distinction between territorial and ideological concepts of citizenship is deeply significant for our national life. This becomes apparent if we ask the following question. By what right does India consider Jammu and Kashmir a part of it? When most of India has a Hindu majority and the state of Jammu and Kashmir has a Muslim majority. India can claim that Kashmir is as much a part of India as any other part of it because it subscribes to the territorial concept of citizenship. What does one mean by that? What one means is that any part of it can be occupied by members following any religion, either as a majority or a minority, because its citizenship does not rest on religion. Some Pakistanis find this argument hard to understand because they regard the partition of India as taking place between a Muslim Pakistan and a Hindu India. They assume that just as being a Muslim constitutes the ideological basis of the citizenship of Pakistan, so too being a Hindu would constitute the ideological basis of Indian citizenship, which is not the case. The subtle but profound point involved here is well illustrated by asking another question. How could the Indian National Congress, which campaigned for Indian independence on the basis of a secular India, justify its acceptance of partition of India in 1947, when it was all along opposed to the idea of any division of India on the basis of religion? It was able to finesse this holdfast by maintaining that while the Muslim League saw the partition of British India as a division between a Muslim Pakistan and Hindu India, the Indian National Congress saw the partition as a division between a theocratic state and a secular state. This is how the acceptance of partition was justified. In this sense, just as the idea of being an Islamic state constitutes the foundational myth of Pakistan, a secular India constitutes the foundational myth of independence. All this by way of emphasizing the enormous importance of the point we are discussing. We are able to claim Kashmir for ourselves because we are secular. Given the importance of this subject, it may be worth recapitulating how India came to be pronounced as a secular state. In doing so, I will pass over the objection that the Constitution in its original version did not declare India to be a secular state, and that, in fact, 3 efforts to introduce the word into the Constitution were rejected by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. This may be so, but it is a fact that the Constitution of India is meant to be essentially secular in conception, even if the word was only introduced in the preamble of the Constitution during the emergency imposed by Mrs. Indira Gandhi to the 42nd Amendment in 1976. Now, after these introductory remarks, I would now like to proceed by examining very briefly the concept of secularism itself, whose importance we have just recognized. The concept comes from Europe. Roman Catholicism was the form of Christianity which prevailed in Europe until it was challenged by the rise of the Protestant movement in the 16th century. This led to violent confrontation between the two. In this respect, the Peace of Westphalia, concluded in 1648, is a critical event in the history of modern Europe. This treaty brought to an end the 30 Years' War between the Catholics and the Protestants and brought peace to the Holy Roman Empire. It enunciated the principle of "Sius regio, ius religio," whose realm, their religion. The basic idea was to establish religious peace by having homogeneous national entities which adhere to one religion and presumably also to one language and one culture. This state of affairs was challenged by the Enlightenment which started reducing the role of religion in public life by claiming to replace it with reason. Various areas of public life, such as politics, social life, and education, which were earlier on under the control or deeply influenced by the church in Europe, were freed from such control. It is worth noting that although European societies are largely considered secular in this sense, many nations in Europe still retain national churches, including Great Britain and Germany. It is France, or rather it is in France, that secularism achieved its most striking formulation in the form of the doctrine of laicite. Now, it is important to recognize that although the political and social arrangements in Europe are usually described as secular in nature, these arrangements were not or are uniform. What to share, however, is the fact that religion no longer remains an active element in the public life of the country. If it does so minimally, because the society itself has become secular, that is, free from the influence of religion in general. The radical nature of the idea of secularism needs to be recognized. For a long time, it was thought that in order for a polity to be harmonious and stable, all members of that polity should follow the same religion or sect. Seems intuitively appealing, right? You have peace when you have the same religion, people following the same religion. Secularism represents a radical departure from this idea and maintains that religious peace is better secured by not having any one religion or sect as the religion of the state, but by having no religion of the state. We now need to take a broader view of this phenomenon of secularism by extending our theater of analysis beyond Europe. Because secularism, in some form or another, also came to characterize new political formulations, such as the United States of America in the 18th century and the communist countries such as Russia in the 20th. When we thus broaden our horizon, it becomes possible to recognize three versions of secularism, which I shall label negative secularism, neutral secularism, and positive secularism. Negative secularism, neutral secularism, and positive secularism. It is important to undertake this exercise because public thinking in the post-Second World War period was characterized by a central, if unarticulated, assumption that the gradual secularization of the world was inevitable, and that it was only a matter of time that the kind of secular society which prevailed in the West will come to characterize the whole world. Or to put it more strikingly, Europe's past was the world's future. The type of secularism which emerged in Europe may be labeled as negative because it was rooted in a negative view of religion, which was seen as a factor retarding the progress of humanity at a time when Europe considered itself to be in the vanguard of human progress. Such negative secularism may be said to have taken three forms. A mild form in those European countries whose society became secular, but the states retained their formal association with a particular Christian denomination. This could be distinguished from a strong form of negative secularism, in which the state itself not only rejected any association with religion or faith, but even sought to control religion itself, as in France. A third and more severe form of negative secularism is represented by the erstwhile communist countries, which were openly hostile to the practice of religion and, in fact, officially preached atheism. These forms of European secularism could be distinguished from the American variety of it, which I labeled neutral, in fact. America was founded largely by people who were escaping religious persecution in Europe. They tried to avoid this development in the new continent by setting up what Thomas Jefferson famously called a wall of separation between religion and the state, as enshrined in the First Amendment of the American Constitution, 1791. And I quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." End of quote. The first part of this amendment, known as the Disestablishment Clause, ensures that the state shall have no religion of its own. The second part, known as the Free Exercise Clause, ensures that the state will not prevent the people from following their own religions. This is a very balanced and even neat provision. Religion is prevented from interfering in matters of the state, and the state is prevented from interfering in matters of religion. Now, a third kind of secularism, I would suggest, though not without some struggle, is represented by Indian secularism, as argued by Rajiv Bhargava in the volume edited by him under the title Secularism and Its Critics. The kind of secularism canvassed therein could be characterized as positive in character. It is a peculiarity of Indian secularism that it retains the right for judicious intervention in matters of religion on part of the state, and therefore envisages some kind of a porousness in the wall of separation between the state and religion. At the same time, however, it does not question the validity of religion or religiosity itself, especially in the form of spirituality and ecumenism. In other words, it does not reject religion in the way European secularism tends to, on the one hand, and it does not leave religion free from state interference to the extent envisaged in the American secular version. At the same time, it rejects the thoroughly negative view of religion espoused within Marxist secularism. Even within the field of Indian secularism, one could distinguish between a Nehruvian version of it, which regarded the role of religion in public life with suspicion, but accepted sublime forms of religiosity, and a Gandhian version, which was willing to use religion as a resource for positive reform and for promoting harmony among various religions. Indian secularism could be seen as toggling between these two poles. There is sometimes a tendency in modern discourse to invoke Western concepts of secularism as models for Indian secularism. In doing so, however, we overlook a major fact. Western secularism arose in a context of intersectarian strife, not so much interreligious. Intersectarian strife and not interreligious strife. That is to say, Western secularism arose in a context in which the various sects which vied for supremacy in the West were almost always Christian sects. Indian religious reality, however, has not only been intersectarian, but to a much more important extent, greater extent, has been interreligious from very ancient times. One should therefore be wary of applying Western models uncritically as they arose in a context of intersectarian conflict for establishing religious peace in India, which is characterized by interreligious conflict as well. The significance of this becomes apparent when we realize that now, as the Western societies become more interreligious in character, the intellectuals there increasingly talk in terms of pluralism rather than secularism, as is evident in the work of Professor Stuart Taylor of Mcgill University. But what constitutes the difference between secularism and pluralism? Another Canadian professor comes to our aid, Professor Willard Oxterby of the University of Toronto, who points out that although both secularism and pluralism aim to achieve the same result, they go about it in different ways. They both share a desire to avoid the dominance of the public square by any one religion or ideology. Secularism seeks to ensure this by denying religion any role in the public sphere, or only a minimal role at best. While pluralism tries to achieve the same result, not by denying, but by giving all religion and ideologies equal space in the public sphere. It is therefore telling that the Western world, as it begins to face a situation characterized more by interreligiosity rather than intersectarianism, is moving from secularism to pluralism as a means of handling the new situation. A very profound point is involved in the shift from secularism to pluralism, which seems to have gone unrecognized, at least so far. It has to do with the nature of universalism associated with religious singularity and plurality, and turns on the concept of universalism involved. Christianity is universal in its aspiration and would ideally like to convert the whole world to Christianity. This kind of universalism needs to be distinguished from another kind, which would accept all religions of the world as valid by themselves. The difference between these two kinds of universalism may be illustrated by examining the use of the word universal in the following two expressions. One, English is a universal language. And two, language is a universal phenomenon. English is a universal language, and language is a universal phenomenon. The use of the word universal in the first case reflects a situation in which everyone all over the world speaks the same one language, in this case English. The second use of the word, however, allows for the simultaneous existence of different languages as a feature of this very world. The difference may be described metaphorically in the following way. To a human being on this planet, both the sky above and the earth around one constitute universal appearance. Yeah, everywhere. Celestial universality, however, is uniform and homogeneous, while terrestrial universality comes with undulations and variations, which characterize the surface of the earth. Thus, celestial universality is characterized by sameness and seamlessness, whereas terrestrial universality is characterized by granularity. it is obvious that pluralism as a concept is more consistent with the second kind of universalism. In theological terms, the first kind of universalism is represented by the expression, there is only one God. And the second by the expression, all gods are one. The same one word is used. I would now like to draw our attention to the striking fact that while a word for the Western concept of secularism had to be coined in the Indian languages, a word for pluralism already exists in the Indian language and has been there with us for around 3,000 years. That word is Nanadhara. Nanadhara. It appears in the Prithvi Sukta of the Atharva Veda, which modern scholars place around 1000 BC, in which the seer poet marvels that this earth on which we live supports many different lifestyles. Nana Dharmanam Janam Vahati. The Kurma Purana, which some place in the 7th century, contains an open recognition of this fact when it says, men and women living in Bharat constitute different communities, worship different deities, and perform different rites. Bharateshu striya punsu nana varna prakirtita. Nana varna prakirtita. Nana de varchane chutta. Nana karmani kurvat. In medieval times, the famous Hindi poet Tulsidas uses the word early on in the Ramcharitmanas when he says, Nana Purana Nigamagama Sambatam, pluralism in text. In our own times, Professor G.C. Pandey is summarizing the field of comparative religion in 40 pages in Sanskrit. Says, Jataya Deva Matani Sampadayascha Nana Asamahita eva vyavasthavita. Throughout the history of Hinduism, kings have been known to patronize the followers of different faiths or religions. And in practice to a certain extent, rather this practice to a certain extent, continued even during the Islamic period of Indian history under its more liberal monarchs. The so-called Hindu Renaissance of the 19th and 20th centuries has promoted pluralism perhaps more vigorously than at any time in India's past, especially under the label of religious tolerance. Some temples in medieval India had the following verse inscribed on them, which is found in a play called Mahanatak, attributed to one Hanuman and dated to the 11th century. It opens with a stanza which is now often cited as a testament of religious tolerance in India. By this time, Buddhism and Jainism had also found a place in the varied panorama of Hinduism. But the words clearly allude to them alongside the various Hindu sects and philosophical schools. This verse has been translated into English by Professor V. Raghavan as follows. He whom the Shaivas worship as Shiva, the Vedantins as the Absolute, the Buddhists as the Buddha, the logicians, great demonstrators as the Creator, those attached to the teachings of Jina, Mahavir as the Arhat, and the ritualists as sacrifice. May that Hari, the Lord of the three worlds, give us the desired fruit. End of quote. Yam Shaiva Samupasita. It's a very famous verse. In 1948, Professor S. Radhakrishnan proposed in his book on the Bhagavad Gita that another line be added to this invocation as follows. Kristva Kristuriti Kriya Prarata Aleti Muhammada that is to say, whom the socially active Christians call Christ and the Muslims Allah. This would have the effect of making the invocation even more comprehensive in its eclectic embrace, as it would bring Christianity and Islam also within its Catholic reach. Further evidence of pluralism within Hinduism is provided by another verse found in the Shiv Mahimna Stav of Pushpadant. Text is difficult to date, but can be confidently assigned to at least the 11th century, if not earlier, because 31 verses from it are inscribed on a temple dedicated to Amareshwar Mahadeva on the banks of the Narmada in the Malwa region. And the date on the inscription corresponds to 10,063 CE. One verse from it has been translated by Professor Radhakrishnan as follows: the Vedas, the Sankhya, the Yoga, the Pashupat, and the Vaishnava creeds, each of them is encouraged in some place or another. Some think that this is better or that is better, owing to differences of taste, but all men reach you the supreme, even as rivers, however zigzag their courses may be, reach the sea. End of quote. This verse was paraphrased by Swami Vivekananda in the very first address he delivered at the World's Parliament of Religion in Chicago on September 11, 1893, a very important date, September 11, wherein he declared, and I quote him now, "I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true. I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and the refugees of all religions and all nations of the earth. I am proud to tell you that we have gathered in our bosom the purest remnant of the Israelites who came to southern India and took refuge with us in the very year in which the Holy Temple was shattered to pieces by Roman tyranny. I am proud to belong to the religion which has sheltered and is still fostering the remnant of the grand Zoroastrian nation. I will quote to you, brethren, a few lines from a hymn which I remember to have repeated from my earliest boyhood, which is every day repeated by millions of human beings as the different streams having their sources in different paths, which men take to different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to day. End of quote. The idea that all reach the supreme, just as all waters reach the sea, is found in hymns in praise of both Shiva and Vishnu. The hymn cited above provides evidence from a Shaiva source. Another verse of uncertain date provides evidence from a Vaishnava source. Just as water which falls from the sky finds its way to the ocean, so does obeisance offered to any of the gods reach Vishnu. Thus, on this point, the various sectarian traditions seem to converge. It should not come as a surprise then that the Om, the sacred Om sound, is interpreted as combining the three gods and asserts their unity with each of its three syllables, A, U, and Ma, standing for one God. A for Vishnu, U for Shiva, and Ma for Brahma. Bilva Mangal, of uncertain date, is credited with the following verse. I quote him now. Undoubtedly, I am a follower of Shiva. Let there be no doubt of that, nor of my due meditation on the 5-lettered sacred text of Shiva, Om Namah Shivaya. Nevertheless, my mind constantly revels in recalling the picture of the beautiful face of child Krishna, beloved of the Gopi maidens. End of quote. The great Tamil savant, Appaya Dikshita, 16th century, further testifies to plural Hindu tolerance in the following verse. I do not find any difference in essence between Shiva, the Lord of the world, and Vishnu, the spirit of the universe. Yet my devotion is given to Shiva. End of quote. Classical Hinduism evolved some key concepts in the in the context of pluralism associated with it. One of these is that of Ishtadevata, already found in the Yoga Sutra. The idea of a chosen deity. It is considered the birthright of every Hindu to choose his or her own deity from out of the vast Hindu pantheon, or even beyond, as one's own chosen deity. In the two previous verses cited above, what Bilva Mangal and Appaya Dikshita are claiming is that although their chosen deity is Shiva, yet they also adore Vishnu. It is clear then that having one's own chosen deity does not exclude engagement with others. And this is a very important point because this explains the phenomenon in various, very common in India, in which various members of the same Hindu family may have their own different Ishtadevas or chosen deities, and yet have no difficulty in living together or even in joining others in worship. These deities could even be worshipped collectively, and individual preferences adjusted accordingly, as is done in the Panchayat and Puja. Another concept relevant in this context is that of Adhikar Bhed, or the principle of differences in eligibility. Thus, different people may pursue different religious practices in accordance with their capacity to do so. Although this principle was sometimes abused to restrict some practices to various groups, in its pristine form, it is the Hindu mirror image of the Buddhist concept of Upaya Kaushalya, or skill in means. That is, when you explain, say, atomic physics to your daughter, 5-year-old daughter or 10-year-old daughter, you do it differently than when you do it in university. The Hindu concept, that of Adhikar Bhed, looks at the matter from the point of view of the aspirant or the student who have different capacities. The Buddhist from the point of view of the teacher or the guru. Yet another concept relevant in this context is that of Sthana Bhed. It embodies the idea that different people set out on their spiritual quest from different points of departure. Namely, from where they stand. There are thus many points of departure towards the spiritual goal. The time has come to bring matters to a close. The gravamen of the argument of this presentation has been that the proper word which would enshrine the ideal relationship among the religions of India is pluralism and not secularism. It is Nana Dharmata and not Dharma Nirpekshita or Pantha Nirpekshita or Sampradaya Nirpekshita. And perhaps the time has come for us to think about replacing the word secular in the preamble of the Indian Constitution by the word plural. Yeah, the time has come to think about replacing the word secular in the preamble of the Indian Constitution by the word plural. Some members of the audience may balk at my associating the concept of pluralism with Hindutva. Because sometimes, and perhaps even often, Hindutva has come to be associated with a narrower vision than the one represented by the word pluralism. To set such doubts at rest, let me conclude by quoting the passage with which V.D. Savarkar, the avowed spokesperson of Hindutva, concludes his well-known tract titled Hindutva, or Who is a Hindu? I quote him now. Equally certain it is that whenever the Hindus come to hold such a position, when they could dictate terms to the whole world, equally certain it is that whenever the Hindus come to hold such a position, when they could dictate terms to the whole world, those terms cannot be very different from the terms which the Gita dictates or the Buddha lays down. The Hindu is most intensely so when he ceases to be a Hindu. And with the Shankara claims the whole earth for Banaras, Varanasi, Medini. Or with the Tukaram exclaims, Amucha Swadesh, Bhuvanatra Devas. My country, O brothers, the limits of the universe. There the frontiers of my country lie. Savarkar ends his book with these words, with which I also end my talk. Thanks for the privilege of your time and attention.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. I think it's been a lot of things for us to think about. And you have ended by quoting Savarkar and also emphasizing pluralism. So I think that's something that we need to think about and explain, because as I said, Hindutva is something that is often not well understood, and you have given one interpretation. So I now request Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe to kindly make his remarks. I think you have to leave around sometime. So
thank you, Dr. Gupta, for inviting me. I am neither a scholar of eminence like Professor Arvind Sharma ji or a very articulated rising star like Sai Deepak, who has been advocating the case of Hindutva in multiple platforms. So mine is a practitioner's track, I would say. And from that point of view, basically I tend to almost entirely agree with Professor Arvind Sharma when he says that the real word for secularism in the Indian context is Nana Dharma. There is a catch in it as well, but I'll come to it at the end. According to me, Hindutva is the definition of India. The idea of India cannot well be defined or captured without referring to Hindutva. There are, of course, some deeply spiritual tenets of this. There are some practical, political sounding aspects of it. And there are some other aspects which concern our day-to-day conduct. As somebody who believes in Hindutva or Hindu way of spirituality for that matter. So I would try to bring to the fore some 7 aspects of the idea of Hindutva, according to me as a student. Firstly, what is the most singularly distinctive characteristic of India is perhaps brought out through our scriptures when we say Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. So this Bahuda and your Nana Dharma go hand in hand. But there is a prerequisite, Ekam Sat. Without accepting Ekam Sat, Vipra Bahuda Vadanti doesn't take you to the destination. And therefore we have to accept, and Hindutva precisely focuses on that we have to accept multiplicity of deities or the ways with which we worship or express our devotion, dedication to some supreme authority. They could be different, but eventually that divine element is one that you have to accept. So, in a way, what I describe as spiritual democracy is the fundamental cornerstone of Hindutva, and in that context, the idea of India. When I say spiritual democracy, in the idea of democracy, again, as I understand, there are elements like unanimity, harmony, and in that context, head count as well, because democracy definitely hinges upon numbers. I mean, you cannot avoid that, and therefore that is very critical. So, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti is the first important feature of Hindutva. The second most important is the unity of our diversity. It is not unity in diversity, perhaps. It is more like the essential unity of ours is manifested in diverse ways, which is why we call it unity in diversity. But in a way, more correctly, perhaps, it is the unity of our diversity. Take examples of our traditions, the way we celebrate various festivals, the kind of songs we sing, the kind of proverbs and sayings that we have in multiple Indian languages. All these things are the manifestations of a diverse character, essentially of the innate unity. We are first one, and therefore we are diverse, not the other way around. The third is our idea of Antyodaya. Because as it happens, the younger generation wants, and understandably so, what answers you have to all these multiple challenges. And one of the challenges pertaining to economic equality, kind of. And for that, I believe the global community continues to grapple with the binary of capitalism and socialism. Antyodaya takes you beyond that, because it considers that the most deprived should be considered as the most deserving when it comes to the distribution of the fruits of development. And therefore, there is element of justice in it, there is element of equality in it, and it prioritizes in a way that the most deprived should be considered as the most deserving. Similarly, when it comes to especially issues like gender, I believe Hindutva also responds to that through the model of Ardhanari Nateshwara, where we believe that a human being has both the elements, femininity and masculinity as well. And therefore, both these things are there, and therefore we could be considering this also as a symbol of our way of looking at the question of gender justice. The fifth important thing is our gratitude towards Mother Nature. Global community is talking about sustainability for the last maybe 3 to 4 decades, but it has been there in our practice. And today also many families see their elders starting their day by saying Padasparsham Kshamaswami, which is seeking forgiveness of Mother Earth, because we are putting our feet on the earth. So, being conscious that we cannot compete with nature, We need not have any idea of conquest over nature, but we should be talking about confluence with Mother Nature. It's something which is integral to our worldview, and therefore this particular aspect is also something critical to the idea of India and therefore the idea of Hindutva as well. The sixth important thing is the gradual kind of maturing of our consciousness, if I may put it that way. We started with an individual and end it with some kind of a collective spirit. Veshti, Samashti, Srushti, and Parameshti. That is what Dindayal Upadhyaya also had said. So individualism is important, no doubt about it. And today, in the days of personal space, privacy, choice, all these things are important. And therefore, individualism is certainly critical, but not at the cost of collectivism. And they need not be kind of at variance with each other always. An individual is a part of a group, and the group is supposed to take care of every individual. That has been the common understanding in our country, and therefore we do not go excessively individualistic, and we also do not want going excessively collectivistic kind of. The seventh important feature is what our G20 motto suggests, which is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Remember, our scriptures don't say Vasudhaiva Samajam or Vasudhaiva Gruham. They call Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Because Kutumba, which is family, is the fundamental or the most primary kind of unit of our society, and it hinges upon relationship. So relationship, which is something these days has become extremely complicated, our culture, our idea, our worldview provides an answer to that. And therefore, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, world as one family. So in one single thing, we try to relate with the entire global community, unlike many other societies and countries. Now, having said that, when I say that these are the seven things, if I may look at them from a more practical point of view, I will try to explain at least 2-3 things with the help of a couple of anecdotes, some real-time experiences. For example, many times people raise questions about symbolism, which goes with our traditions, culture, and essentially, therefore, some kind of Hindu element in it. There was a debate about whether the government functions should be starting with lighting of the lamp, or should we be breaking a coconut. I was once in Chicago attending a Rotary International function. I was a Rotary scholar then, some 25 years before. And at that meeting, it started with a prayer, and the prayer was addressed to Jesus Christ. So naturally, in a question-answer session, one of the delegates, he was a Muslim, he asked a question that you say that Rotary is a secular, non-denominational organization, then why this prayer is addressed to Jesus Christ? The then global president of Rotary International explained that you must understand that no movement, and Rotary is a global movement, takes any shape in a vacuum. It takes shape in a society and along with the society. So the ethos of the society and the ethos that with which the movement grows, there are several common things. And therefore, since Rotary has taken birth in a Christian state, this prayer is addressed to Jesus Christ. But you may consider it as addressed to whatever your own God. We don't object to that. I believe this requires to be sunk well. All these things are a part of our ethos. They do not, and we continue to be non-denominational for that matter. That let me be making very clear. I mean, it should not be unnecessarily confused with the idea of secularism. and statecraft using certain symbolisms. It is quite natural because society doesn't go only on the basis of whatever the provisions in the constitution or mere rationalistic approach. I don't think sustains a society. It requires some emotive content in it and what perhaps constitutes our common ethos as well. People say, it's okay, you are talking about Hindutva, but what is so very important about it that we should be taking pride in it? Because we know that in the 90s, when the temple movement was at its peak, this slogan we used to hear all around, which was "Garva se kaho Hindu hai." तो एक बार हमारे महाराष्ट्र के एक समाचार पत्र में इसके ऊपर एक डिबेट हुआ. इन दोज डेज letters to the editor's column used to be very famous for authentic and objectively written letters and given space by the editors also, unlike what we see today. So one of the writers said कि गर्व से कहो हम हिंदू है is a very illogical kind of slogan, क्योंकि गर्व काय के लिए? जिस चीज में आपका कोई कर्तृत्व नहीं, आप हिंदू घर में जन्मे, इसमें आपका क्या कर्तृत्व है? विधाता ने तय किया कि आप हिंदू हो गए, आप मुसलमान भी हो सकते थे, पारसी भी हो सकते थे, यहूदी हो सकते थे. तो गर्व से कहो हम हिंदू हैं is very very illogical. We should rubbish it. If you want a slogan, it could be गर्व से कहो हम मानव हैं. तो उसके बाद और एक लेटर राइटर ने पत्र लिखा कि गर्व से कहो हम मानव है sounds very logical apparently, but it is also not so logical as the letter writer wants us to believe, क्योंकि आप मानव जन्मे, इसमें भी आपका क्या कर्तव्य है? आप बैल, घोड़ा या सुअर या जो भी है तो कुछ भी बन सकते थे, मगर आप मानव बने, अभी आप उसमें तो आपका कोई कर्तव्य नहीं. So why should you be taking pride in it? So the slogan should be गर्व से कहो हम है. That's it. The third writer, because it was a continued debate, उसने लिखा कि दोनों पत्र लेखकों के आर्गुमेंट्स मैंने सुने हैं, मगर मुझे लगता है कि दोनों इलॉजिकल हैं, क्योंकि अपने परिवेश में जिसके साथ हम पलते बढ़ते हैं उसके प्रति एक अभिमान होना, क्योंकि दैट गिव्स यू एन आइडेंटिटी. अब ये उड़ीसा का हादसा हुआ तो उसकी संख्या के कारण और बाकी भी हम सब उद्वेलित हुए, नो डाउट अबाउट इट. मगर आप इमेजिन करिए कि रोम में कोई ऐसा ही अपघात होता है और कुछ 50-60 लोगों की जान जाती, तो हमारे लिए तो क्या न्यूज होती है, अच्छा ऐसा हुआ क्या, दैट्स इट. फिर कोई बताता है कि नहीं वो रोम के हादसे में आपके दिल्ली के 15 लोग थे, तो थोड़ा अच्छा ऐसा हम करेंगे. फिर वो बोलेंगे नहीं करोलबाग के थे, तो फिर आपको और रियली ऐसे करते करते जब आपको वो परिसर, वो परिवेश, वो भाषा, वो समूह, इसके कारण आपको आपकी अस्मिता मिलती है, आइडेंटिटी मिलती है. And therefore, to take pride in your identity is something very, very important, fundamental. It provides you some kind of a raison d'etre for your continued life. It is okay for Shakespeare to say what is in name, but there is everything in name. अगर मैं विजय का स्पेलिंग, विनय का स्पेलिंग कोई विजय करता है तो मुझे आधार कार्ड नहीं मिलेगा. तो I mean, identity is something very, very important, and therefore there is nothing wrong in taking legitimate pride in it. बशर्ते हमें ये समझना होगा कि our smaller identities are a part of the larger identity. जय जगत विनोबा जी ने कहा था, बढ़िया है. हमारे संत ज्ञानेश्वर ने हे विश्वची माझे घर का, वो भी सही है, मगर डे 1 से विश्वची माझे घर नहीं हो सकता. जय जगत एकदम चौथी कक्षा में नहीं आ सकता, वो बाद में आएगा, धीरे धीरे आएगा. इट इज काइंड ऑफ ए प्रोग्रेसिव अनफोल्डमेंट. तो मैं मानता हूं कि इस दृष्टि से देखें तो मूविंग बियॉन्ड द ज्योग्राफिकल बाउंड्रीज, बिकॉज व्हेन there is any discussion about Hindutva, the talk of cultural nationalism also comes into the play. तो उसमें भी कोई गलत नहीं, क्योंकि हमारा देश और उसकी सांस्कृतिक विरासत का जो प्रभाव है वो देश की सीमाओं के बाहर बहुत सारे क्षेत्रों में था, पहले भी रहा, आज भी है और आगे भी रहेगा, और इसलिए उसमें भी कोई इलॉजिकल है ऐसा मानने की जरूरत नहीं है. Lastly, I would only say that while this Nana Dharma or Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti or pluralism or multiple ways, all these things are certainly very important. They are the foundational concepts of Hindutva, I would say. But a large-hearted person cannot live happily with a narrow-minded person. So every such person who doesn't believe in Ekam Sat will have to be converted, will have to be transformed into accepting that there is nothing like my way or highway. I think I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Practitioner's viewpoint, because a lot of these problems are ultimately we have to deal with on a daily life. But I think a good conceptual framework, 7 features of Hindutva, which you gave, which I think you also touched upon this in your last lecture as well. So now I request Sai Deepak ji, I have already introduced you. So please go ahead.
Saiji, I will be there for 5 minutes later on. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, okay. My apologies. So I thank the VIF for giving me this opportunity, and my apologies for the 10-minute delay. I wish I'd been there for the opening remarks. From the lofty heights of the Arvind Sharma's lecture to the pragmatism of Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, I think there's a lot to grapple with. I will perhaps start with the title itself of the topic. Why do we need to reconcile Hindutva with secularism in the first place? Why is secularism even remotely a construct that our worldview needs to accommodate? Because one of the questions that I'm trying to ask myself ever since I started talking about these topics is who sets the benchmarks? Why are these benchmarks relevant? Why are we trying to pass muster on the anvils of an imported benchmark and then trying to force fit it within our worldview? If Bharat has existed for thousands of years as a civilizational state or as a civilizational entity, if not a state, without the need for secularism or such a concept in the first place, what is it that has changed over the last few decades or centuries that this particular construct seems to have acquired so much of importance in our discourse? And I believe that perhaps there is still a certain element of lack of civilizational confidence to actually hit the reset button in a very strong way, which is to go back to factory settings and say, sorry, we don't need to discuss this, and it doesn't need to form part of the drawing board when I'm interested in creating a Republic 2.0. There's no point in trying to build a new story using the tools of the master instead of asking, how did we exist prior to that? That is precisely where I come from when it comes to decoloniality. I think, while I completely agree with the exposition of the history of secularism and its various variants that Professor Sharma has pointed out brilliantly, as long as we continue to use that word, its inherent semantics will continue to dog us. And the unfortunate reality is that that particular concept has come to represent a fundamental gulf or schism between the state and religion. And that needs to be done away with, at least given our geopolitical realities and our civilizational challenges. And therefore, I would agree more with Dr. Sahasrabuddhe's final pragmatic point that perhaps the wolf and the goat cannot hope to sit together at the same table unless the goat has gone through the process of wolfization or the wolf has become a goat in some way. And therefore, that hammering is necessary, that subduing is necessary. And there I would not subscribe to the misplaced lofty heights of Vedantism. And if I were to go back to the root cause of the primary proponent of Advaita Vedanta, his adherence to Vedas and to the scripture is second to none. If anything, given the context of his movement, it was about re-establishing the supremacy of the Vedas as the primary pramana. With that being the very message of his life, I'm not able to subscribe to a wishy-washy kind of concept, which effectively says, I will accept every authority as the same and every authority as equal. I will not be able to. So I'm happy to see this as perhaps the ultimate, let's say, movement towards human evolution. I think we are significantly away from that. If anything, we have regressed significantly. And therefore, given the real-time challenges that we face in court, outside of it, in public discourse and political discourse, thanks to the weaponization of secularism, it is important to question its impact. Whatever may have been its original history, the manner in which it applies to this country, and the manner in which it has been weaponized to finish and wipe out indigenous non-Abrahamic societies needs to be seriously asked. We are not at the same level as an Abrahamic society. We don't operate in that way. And therefore, as an indigenous non-Abrahamic system, faith system, or a societal system, so to speak, I would approach any concept or word that has a Christian origin with the greatest of suspicions and with the greatest of cautions. And I would not even remotely touch it with a barge pole unless it proves itself to me. Assuming that the French model represents some kind of irreligious secularism, I would still disagree with that proposition in the first place, because enlightenment itself operates in a Christian template. It may have chosen to divorce itself from the optics of Christianity, but its approach is Christian, its values are Christian. The way it holds on to its dogma with fanaticism is Christian. And as long as that continues to be the case, I'm no fan of enlightenment. Europe lived in dark ages, Bharat did not. I don't need to subscribe to the dark ages of Europe and treat it as the dark age of the rest of the world. Europe is not the world. So if that is the way to go about it, I wouldn't want to try and pass muster on the anvils of Western ideals. Our Rajas may have patronized multiple faith systems, multiple dharmic systems, let's be clear, dharmic systems, but that did not stop them from having the concept of a titular deity to which they owed their allegiance. Therefore, to accommodate others within my bosom, I don't need to give up what is mine, must be the first position. Until that position is accepted and until that is treated as a non-negotiable, that line in the sand is drawn very clearly and rigidly and firmly, with the power of force backing it. This discussion, in my humble opinion, may not help us address our existential challenges. From Jallikattu to Sabarimala to Padmanabha Swami Temple, what I see is nothing but weaponization of secularism at the hands of a constitutional organ in the name of the constitution against the civilization. And there I have no reason to arrive at a different conclusion whatsoever. So we may try as much as possible to somehow stitch together a cannibalized version of secularism, taking pieces from France, Ireland, Europe, America, so on and so forth, but it still reflects lack of originality. And as long as that remains the case, I don't think our Vishwaguru aspirations are worth having, because we don't seem to have the confidence to draw from our own principles. So, pluralism in the real world can function as long as there is a force at the core which holds everything together. Which means we may not be strictly a nation state in the European mold, but there must be a core nation that binds everyone together in one way or the other. I might as well give a very clear, perhaps a politically incorrect example. If the core Hindu identity were to assert itself strongly, I suspect the Khalistani movement wouldn't have asserted itself and wouldn't have been able to rear its head starting from the separate electorates of 1906, which is when the actual issue started. The Singh Sabha networks were established because they wanted a similar treatment. And that was being watered and nourished by the British. The core identity has refused to assert itself, which is exactly why when the core is not strong, just like an election, you're not going to cast your vote behind a weak candidate who doesn't trust himself, who doesn't back himself. The same logic equally applies itself to civilizational choice. When people realize that the core is not confident and is suffering from a bout of lack of confidence, then it will start mirroring itself in the identity of someone who is strong. So the Khalistani identity is closer, according to me, to the Wahhabi identity than the Hindu identity, in its tone, tenor, in its anti-Hinduism, and its iconoclasm. So the core needs to be established very clearly. Now, the core can go about establishing itself through a rampage. That would be the European way of doing it, or that could be the Middle Eastern way of doing it. But we have evolved a process of Samanvaya. Samanvaya as a process requires two things: the silent, ever-present stick and the soft carrot that is constantly offered. That is perhaps the only way to deal with the situation. Which means that we say Hindutva at the heart of it does not care for secularism because that is not one of its priorities. Hindutva cares for survival of our way of life, our ways of life, all of which are influenced by culture. So between religion and culture, obviously there's a very clear nexus. And those religious systems that come from different cultural systems obviously cannot find it easy to survive here, except in the most extreme of circumstances, which is to seek refuge, which explains why Parsis and Jews have managed to survive here, because they had no other option. So if they had an option, would they have in peacetime coexisted with us the way they are? It's not as if they subscribe to sacred notions of cow otherwise. Why is it that they have managed to respect all those notions in this country? Because the circumstances in which they arrived here were very different. So I'm going to proceed on the basis that if we are to really chart a way forward, both constitutionally and civilizationally, the best way to do this is to remove and weed out the word secularism altogether, fully, and start afresh, without any attempt at trying to force fit it in our future worldview or even the current worldview. I understand the game of trying to use the word and rework its meaning for the sake of optics. I also realize its serious limitations when it comes to your ability to argue beyond a point and defend your position beyond a point. Try defending the CAA on the anvils of secularism, and I will see if you can succeed in doing so. If you were to say that Bharat as a state does not have an identity of its own, but it can still choose to fashion a refugee policy which has a specific religious bent, you will never be able to do that. This is the direct implication of a theoretical flaw and its direct practical consequence. As long as you try to argue within these corners, you will tie yourself in greater knots. I'm coming purely from a negotiating perspective, a hard-nosed litigator who knows what is going to work in a negotiation and what will not. I don't wish to fight this particular battle for the civilization with secularism weighing me down like an albatross around my neck. It's a millstone that needs to be jumped as quickly as possible. Two, if I'm interested in creating a greater Pax Indica, I'm much more interested in creating a model, a feasible model for the rest of the world to emulate, rather than trying to co-opt them prematurely. The best way to convince people is by creating a workable model, proof of concept. Bharat already, in the manner that it exists, as a plural society, as a plural dharmic society, is already a proof of concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But at the heart of that particular social experiment has been the concept of dharma. I will never extend the use of the word dharma or its connotations to non-Indic faith systems until they indicize themselves. Which means Indian Judaism can perhaps be called an Indian faith system. The Parsis of Bharat could be treated as a separate form of Zoroastrianism, which is Indic in nature, not in their pre-form, in their pre-conquest form. Which is perhaps one of the reasons that I refuse to buy the myth called Indian Islam. Still, I'm not ready to buy that yet. Until these faith systems go through that Indicization. And I don't think that is going to happen through dialogue. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen through dialogue. Germany needed 2 bitter lessons to calm down. Japan needed a massive lesson to calm down. Some people need a massive lesson because any attempt at dialogue, if it's seen as weakness, it's not going to help in any kind of reconciliation. So I don't want to use either Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam or Ekam Sadbhadanti, nothing of that sort, because all of these apply only to dharmic systems. These are not dharmic systems. They don't follow natural law. They don't believe in cosmological balance. They don't believe in reincarnation. They don't believe in karma. They don't believe in Varnashrama Dharma. They don't believe in any of these aspects. Such systems can be accommodated within the dharmic fold only to the peril of at the expense of the civilization and its fundamental principles. This is perhaps my limited submission here. I'm happy to take questions, but I'm very clear about one thing. It's okay to perhaps say a few things for the sake of optics from a different platform, but at least in these discussions, I think it's very, very important to get hard-nosed, because there must be some place where the hit reset button is considered seriously as an option, not just as something that can be considered in the realm of theory. I'll give you a simple example and I'll leave it at that. Left to some members of unelected organs, and I leave it to people's imagination as to what I'm referring to and who I'm referring to. Every possible civilizational symbol and every possible Hindu symbol from every state institution will be wiped out. And I've heard them speak in their private discussions as to what exactly they think about this culture's, this land's culture and its faith system. When the mic is off. So I refuse to buy the possibility of coexistence as long as the other silently operates with the hope that one day you will convert. They are willing to bide their time and use every means possible. Trying to force fit secularism within the rubric of Hindutva is to start from a position of compromise and concession at a negotiation. That's always a losing position. The best way to negotiate in any situation is to hold on steadfast to your guns. Metaphorically speaking, of course. From a position of intransigence and then walk towards the middle ground if there is some kind of overture from the other side. If not, as a civilization, which is perhaps the last standing mothership of indigenous non-Abrahamic civilizations, which has a responsibility as far as the Asian future is concerned. We have the leadership of Asia because I don't think China can do it, not with its mindset, not with its disrespect for nature, not with its inability to understand. Anybody who can actually establish a base on our holiest of sites can never be trusted. So considering all this, we have a huge responsibility. I don't see the world moving towards the existence of a single religion. Pluralism, I certainly agree, is the way forward. But pluralism will go hand in hand with spheres of influence. You will have a Bharatiya Hindu sphere of influence. If Christianity develops, regrows a spine, it will find a base again. Its last standing goalpost or outpost is United States, which is going through a fantastic phase of implosion while I watch it with Coke and popcorn. And therefore, today, effectively, you're looking at the expanding influence of one particular identity with its epicenter, with two epicenters in the Middle East. Pluralism is not the response to this. Pluralism is perhaps the final culmination. First response is the creation of a massive sphere of influence in the immediate neighborhood. And then, perhaps in the hope that either there is a peaceful way out. If not, you must be ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all those very clear remarks and clear viewpoint, which essentially, I think to me, it means that now be ready for a final war. Because the way spheres of influence of others, the Chinese, the Middle East, etc.
We can disagree with Samuel Huntington as much as he wants, but I think
he's right. Okay. So the clash of civilizations is coming. So I think we'll open now for some.
Yeah.
I would like, yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah, it's a fantastic.
Some of the points.
Yes, yes.
Some of the points. Yes. Okay. So the first point is that basically the paper is useless. Right? In the sense. So, well, I would urge that it has some relevance because we are living with a colonized mentality. And so, in fact, this achieves partly the goal of decolonization by indicating the term we would have used for our own approach to our diversity. The second point I would like to make is about Shankara and his reliance on the Veda, which is absolutely correct. But what I find intriguing in Shankara is that he also uses Anubhava as a very important category. And if we take that into account, then there's a very interesting coincidence between a statement in Bhartrihari, where he says, the ultimate test of spiritual truth is Swarbuddhi Manaya. The only test of it is your own experience. And Shankara says in his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, Katham Ekasya, how you can challenge the experience of someone, Katham Ekasya Swahridaya Pratyam, Brahma Vedanam Sharir Dharanancha. That is, I myself have this experience. Katham Anne Pratikshatum Shapita, how can anybody challenge it? So we have this commitment to the Veda, but we also have these other windows which enable us to reach out to others and a broader platform. The third point is about the need for a code with pluralism. I would prefer the use of the word anchor. So that for our religious literature, yeah, it's profuse, profound, prolific, but it always brought in some connection with the Veda. Fifth Veda, Tamil Veda, Jivan Veda, sort of. And that serves as an anchor, stabilizing influence on that pluralism. Otherwise, it would just become dispersed and disintegrated. Yeah, okay. We can pursue these points further. Now, the one about Sikh, the Sikh example is very interesting. And I would connect that to a particular development which has emerged in my study of the situation, that the Shiromani Universal Power Committee's act actually contains an expression which I would consider indicates the actual influence, as you pointed out, of the Western concept of religion on us. There are two examples of this in modern India, in Dr. Ambedkar and in the Sikh dispensation under the committee, where it says that a Sikh is one who believes in the 10 Gurus and who believes in the Guru Granth Sahib and everything, and who follows no other religion. This is an Indic, who follows no other religion. Similarly, in the case of Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar, when he led his people to come to Buddhism, apart from the 3 refugees, he also made them renounce various Hindu gods. This is totally un-Buddhist. In fact, there are examples from the canon, this canon, where a Jain, actually 2 Jains, offered to become lay followers of the Buddha when they are convinced of his teaching. The Buddha asked them, will you continue to patronize the Jain community after becoming a follower? And when they say yes, only then he accepts them. So this is the litmus test. The other You reject the other, you are indifferent to the other is fine. You transcend the other is fine. But if you reject the other, you are in trouble with the indifferent. Okay, about the Zoroastrian and the Jews. Now, I would argue, though, okay, we'll revise my position later on, but my preliminary position is that Zoroastrians and the Jews are not perceived as problems by us because they do not convert. So the real test is whether you convert somebody else or not. And as opposed to the numbers, is it a qualitative thing or a quantitative thing? This is what we have to decide. I never looked at it from the point of view just indicated by Deepak, that it might be because of the numbers. I always thought that because they did not see concept in this, therefore they were accepted. Okay. Okay, about Asia's past and the role of China in that, a very interesting point, because I would have normally included China, but it is pre-communist China which serves as a model, but not post-communist China. So otherwise we would have said that India represents the dharmic worldview and Japan continues to represent it. Pre-communist China also represents it. So there is this delicate issue of what to do with China. And therefore, in connection with Asia's past. And then we can claim that just as earlier on it was claimed in the case of secularism, that Europe's past is the world's future, we can now claim that Asia's past is the world's future. So pluralism. I think these are the short notes I made of our discussion.
Thank you. I think we'll open it for discussion.
Thank you very much. It was very educative listening to you, but I really have queries for Mr. Deepak. And actually what you said is very attractive and intellectually I'm convinced with you, but since you are saying we should be hard-nosed,